When rain falls softly. The rain began as a whisper against the hospital windows. Sarah Mitchell pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching droplets race down the surface like tears she couldn't shed. In her arms, wrapped in the softest white blanket the nurses could find, her daughter Emma slept peacefully. 3 days old, perfect in every way that mattered. But perfection couldn't pay rent. It couldn't buy formula or diapers. It couldn't erase the medical bills that would follow them home like shadows. Sarah had walked out of Mercy General Hospital that Thursday evening with nothing but the clothes on her back, a small bag of baby supplies, and a heart full of love that felt both overwhelming and insufficient. The rain had started just as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and now it fell steadily, turning the city streets into mirrors that reflected the neon signs and streetlights. She had called her sister 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was 40 blocks away, and the buses had stopped running an hour ago. The taxi drivers who passed barely slowed down when they saw a young woman in a hospital gown, barefoot and holding a baby. Sarah found herself walking through the financial district, where glass towers stretched toward the cloudy sky like fingers reaching for stars they'd never touch. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, surrounded by buildings that housed more money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes, and she couldn't afford a ride home. Her legs began to shake first. 3 days of hospital food and very little sleep had left her weak. The rain soaked through her thin gown, and she could feel the cold seeping into her bones. Emma stirred in her arms, making the small sounds that meant she would need feeding soon. Sarah looked around desperately. The streets were mostly empty, just a few late workers hurrying past under umbrellas, their faces hidden and distant. She tried to catch someone's eye, to signal that she needed help, but everyone seemed to look right through her. That's when her knees gave out. She sank to the wet pavement beside a vintage black car, clutching Emma close to her chest. The baby began to cry, a sound that cut through the rain like a siren. Sarah's vision blurred, whether from exhaustion or tears, she couldn't tell. "Please," she whispered to the empty street. "Someone help us." But the few people who passed seemed to quicken their pace, their umbrellas tilted forward like shields. In this part of the city, people were used to stepping over problems, not solving them. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on keeping Emma warm. She sang softly, the lullaby her own mother had sung to her years ago, when the world felt safer and simpler. Her voice cracked with exhaustion, but she kept singing. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed to move differently when you were sitting on cold concrete, holding everything that mattered in your arms. Then she heard footsteps. Not the quick, purposeful clicks of heels or the shuffle of sneakers, but the measured pace of leather shoes on wet pavement. Someone was walking toward her, not away. Sarah looked up to see a man approaching. He was tall, with dark hair that glistened with raindrops, wearing an expensive coat that somehow managed to look elegant even in the downpour. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They weren't the calculating eyes she expected from someone in this part of the city. They were kind, concerned. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. "Are you hurt?" Sarah tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I don't mean to be in your way. I couldn't make it home." The man knelt beside her, seeming unconcerned about his expensive suit. "Getting wet. You're not in my way," he said. "You need help. That's different." He shrugged off his coat and draped it around Sarah's shoulders. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming. "My name is David Chen," he said. "What's yours?" "Sarah Mitchell. And this is Emma." She looked down at her daughter, who had stopped crying and was now looking up with curious dark eyes. "She's beautiful," David said, and he meant it. "How old?" 3 days. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "We just left the hospital, and I thought I could walk home, but..." She gestured helplessly at the rain, at her bare feet, at the impossibility of their situation. David didn't ask a lot of questions. He didn't need to. Sometimes the story was written in someone's eyes, in the way they held themselves, in the careful way they cradled what mattered most. "My car is right here," he said, nodding toward the vintage vehicle she'd collapsed beside. "Let me take you home." Sarah hesitated. She'd been taught to be wary of strangers, especially ones who drove expensive cars and wore watches that probably cost more than she made in a year. But Emma chose that moment to make a small, contented sound, and Sarah felt her resistance crumble. I don't have money for gas, she said quietly. David smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and made the rain seem less cold. I wasn't asking for any. He helped her to her feet with a gentleness that spoke of experience with fragile things. Sarah noticed his hands were steady, careful. These were hands that had held newborns before. The car's interior was warm and smelled faintly of leather and vanilla. David started the engine and turned up the heat without asking. What's your address? He said. Sarah gave him the cross streets of her neighborhood, 30 blocks away from the gleaming towers and manicured parks. A different world entirely. As they drove through the rain-washed streets, David told her about his own daughter. She was grown now, with children of her own, but he remembered those first few days. The overwhelming love mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. The feeling that you'd do anything, sacrifice everything, for this tiny person who depended on you completely. I was lucky, he said, glancing at Sarah in the rearview mirror. I had help, family, resources. Not everyone does. When they reached Sarah's building, David didn't just drop her off. He helped her to her door, carrying her small bag and making sure she had her keys. Before he left, he pressed something into her hand. This is my business card, he said. On the back, I've written the number for a friend of mine. Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She runs a clinic that helps new mothers. Free checkups for you and Emma. Parenting classes. Even help with groceries if you need it. Sarah looked at the card, then at David. Why? She asked. Why would you help us? David was quiet for a moment, looking out at the rain that continued to fall. Because someone helped me once, he said finally. When my daughter was born, her mother and I were barely 19. Scared, broke. A stranger helped us when we needed it most. I promised myself that if I was ever in a position to help someone else, I would. He turned to go, then paused. Take care of each other, he said. The world needs more love in it. As his car disappeared into the rainy night, Sarah stood in her doorway holding Emma close. The rain was still falling, but somehow it sounded different now. Softer, like a blessing. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes kindness appears just when you think the world has forgotten how to care. And sometimes, on a rainy night when everything seems impossible, a stranger reminds you that you're not alone. Sarah looked down at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. We're going to be okay, little one, she whispered. There are still good people in this world. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean.